So I'm just going to move this over here because I've got some notes,
Mhm.
and then I'll ask you the questions first, okay?
Yep.
So, question one: how do you use assessment data and evidence of student learning to inform decisions for planning sequencing, clarifying learning intentions, and adjusting instruction across a teaching cycle? So, just to start, how do you actually use data in your day-to-day teaching, like when you're planning, sequencing lessons, or adjusting what you're doing?
So I use assessment data constantly throughout my teaching. Formative assessment like questioning, observations, and work samples help me see what students understand in the moment. Then I use that to adjust my lessons or revisit concepts or move forward. And then summative data helps me guide future planning.
Okay, so yeah, that makes sense. So, would you say you are constantly adjusting what you're seeing in the moment and not just waiting until the end of the unit?
Yeah, yep. So if I feel like they might be struggling with some concepts, I might add a different activity or revisit it a little bit in a different way. Yeah, just so I'm not waiting till that end of that unit to
Yeah.
to assess.
And that's exactly what we're talking about right now in our unit is gathering that information so that people aren't just struggling at the end of the lesson. So what that really connects to is how planning is informed by assessment data, which has been in the learning about for the GTA Practice 3. So I just want to put in where that is with my GTPA links. I've just put down some notes here for that in case you think I'm going off. GTPA. Okay, so question two is how does the teacher interpret assessment evidence to identify patterns of student progress, misconceptions, cognitive readiness, and learning needs, and how do these insights influence instructional decisions? So basically, when you're looking at student work, how do you pick up on patterns or misconceptions within the class?
I try to look for common errors or misunderstandings in student work. So if I notice several students making the same mistake, I know it's something I need to address with the whole class.
Do you ever find that a lot of students have the same misconceptions? And if that happens, do you reteach it differently?
Yeah, definitely. I'll often reteach using a different strategy or provide more examples.
Okay, that makes sense. So that would be linking to the understanding students and where they're at before teaching, which is part of the GPBI practice one. So the next question, how do you apply the principles to multi-tiered system of supports, MTSS, in planning and instruction, particularly tier one, high quality classroom instruction, and how are decisions made about when students may require tier two targeted support or tier three intensive intervention? How is responsiveness to intervention monitored? So when we learn about this, it's how do you approach supporting different learners in your class? Do you use something like a tiered system?
Yes, I use a tiered approach. So tier one is a whole class teaching with differentiation. Tier two is small group support for students who need extra help. Tier three is more intensive and individual support.
Okay, so how do you actually decide the difference between a student needing tier two support versus tier three?
So it's based on assessment data and how students respond to that support. If a student isn't progressing with tier two support, they may need tier three intervention.
And would tier three students usually have something like a personal learning plan?
Yes, the students at tier three often have a PLP, and that may involve additional support from specialists.
Okay, yeah. So in my prac, what they had done was they didn't necessarily talk about tiered learning, but it was if the students were a tier three, they had another inclusive support teacher who would come and take the students out during class time, just so that the class could move on, I suppose, and then they could have more of a focused intervention. Do you think that's good?
Oh, definitely, definitely. It really helps that you're not stuck in a rut with some and you're not holding
Yeah,
the ones who are able to keep going
yeah.
backwards. So, yeah, it's definitely helpful.
So that makes sense, especially how you're adjusting support based on data, and that really connects to differentiation in GTPA practice too. Sorry, I've just wrote all my GTPA stuff down here. So, question 4, how does the teacher use explicit instruction and modeling to introduce new content, including clear learning intention, success criteria, worked examples, checking for understanding, and step-by-step explanations that support students to process new knowledge effectively? When you're introducing something new, how do you usually structure that? Do you use explicit teaching?
Yes, so I use explicit teaching with clear learning intentions and success criteria. I model the task, then guide the students, and then allow them to work independently.
Do you find that I do, we do, you do model works well?
Yeah, it works really well for supporting student understanding.
With that structure, that really shows support and how students learn new content, which aligns with effective teaching strategies in your GTPA practice too. How do you scaffold instruction and learning to manage task complexity and cognitive load, support students at different proficiency levels, and gradually withdraw scaffolds as students develop fluency and independence? When you're supporting students, what kind of scaffolding do you usually use?
I use things like sentence starters or visual supports and guided practice.
Could you give me an example of a scaffold that you've used in the lesson?
Yep, so for writing, I might provide a template or a sentence starter to help students structure their ideas.
And how do you know when to start removing that support?
So when students become more confident and can complete tasks independently, I gradually remove those supports.
Yeah, perfect. And that idea of gradually removing support really shows how students move from supported to independent learning. Next one. So, how do you intentionally embed literacy and numeracy practices within teaching and assessment to support differentiated learning needs across the full range of student abilities? So, just as in, how do you embed literacy and numeracy across your teaching? Because this is something that I found difficult, especially for literacy when you have to add in numeracy. Like I just really, really struggled with that. And they were saying about even putting in words for your numbers, like the pool, if they were at the pool was so many meters wide and long.
Yeah,
Yeah.
great idea. Yeah. So I try and integrate literacy and numeracy into all subject areas through reading, writing, and problem solving tasks.
And that shows that learning is structured across the curriculum to support misunderstanding. Question 7, how do you select and use a range of assessment strategies and provide timely, specific, and actionable feedback to support students' learning and progression? How do you provide feedback to support student learning?
I give timely, specific feedback so students know what they are doing well and how to improve at the time.
Okay, so that will link, really support student progress, link into the GTPA practice 3. So the teacher, how does the teacher design assessment tasks and learning experiences to manage intrinsic and extraneous cognitive load, minimize overload, and explicitly connect to new learning to prior knowledge and existing schema? So how do you make sure students don't get overwhelmed when learning something new?
I try and sort of break it up into small steps and connect learning to what students already know.
Yeah. So, what were we just talking about there? So yeah, so that's what they're talking about for chunking. I'm trying to think of other things that I wrote in my assignment. Because of the cognitive load is if you're not chunking it up, then it doesn't stay in your long-term memory. So this is something that we're really covering, which is another thing that I'm really learning about. Smaller pieces embed deeper, because actually our long-term memory has a vast amount of space, but our short-term memory doesn't.
Yeah, it totally makes sense.
Yeah. So, how does assessment design instructional support change as students progress from novice to more proficient learners, including shifts from highly scaffolded tasks to independent application, transfer, and problem solving. So does your teaching change as students become more independent?
Yeah, so I gradually reduce the support and give students more responsibility for their learning. So I might give them their base information, and then I might say, okay, this is your research time. You can go off now and find out what you can find out, and then we come back and share it and see, and then hopefully different students have got different information and we can sort of all share it together and learn something new.
Yeah,
that way.
exactly. So that's good. And then that's again what we were looking for in. Oh, sorry, my Zoom is about to run out of sound. Oh, okay, I'll go quick. So, how is teaching and assessment responsive to teachers who require targeted or intensive support, including adjustments with Tier 1 instruction and alignment between classroom teaching and intervention? So, how do you support students who need more targeted help?
I try and provide small group support and adjust tasks to suit their needs.
Do you work with other teachers or support staff when planning for those students?
Yes, so collaboration is very important, just to bounce feedback off what each class is doing and what other teachers are finding from their students and their learning.
Yeah, and we were seeing that in my prac again, whenever all the prep teachers would come together. And I feel like that's whenever they would do that tiered measurement as well, because they would put the tier 3 groups out with that inclusive support teacher.
Yeah.
And you sort of manage that time for them to go out. And I've just never seen that done before, and it was really interesting. So that collaboration, they were then looking to see if any of those students, when they were going out by their work that the inclusive support teacher would bring them back, they were moving them into a tier 2. So that was good. So how does the teacher make consistent and defensible professional judgments about the quality of student work and engage in assessment moderation practices to support comparability and shared standards? So how do you make consistent judgments about student work?
So I use rubrics and standards and moderation with other teachers to ensure consistency across the board.
Okay. And how does the teacher evaluate the impact of their teaching practices on student learning and well-being, and use this evaluation and progress monitoring data to refine and improve future teachings? So how do you reflect on your teaching and know if it's actually working?
So I try and reflect on student outcomes and adjust my teaching accordingly.
Okay, so do you and the other year 4 teachers collaborate on planning and assessment together? Like, do you have times?
Yes, so we either get blocks after school in the planning times after school, or sometimes on planning days we'll get all of us together at once.
Okay. Oh yeah, planning days, that's another good one. So when I was on my prac, we did have a planning, or no, we had an after school session where this guy came in and he was just talking about forms of collecting data. And again, that's the first time I really ever seen that. And he was just using ways, but that would have been like a professional development, I think, as well as sort of a planning time. And in that school, they do those quite frequently. So it's great that they offer so much days for that professional development, because not all schools give you that.
Yeah, definitely helps.
So, so that's our link. The reflection and collaboration really connects to evaluating teaching practice, which is part of the GTPI Practice 5. Okay, so that is all the questions. And just my Zoom is not a paid one, so it's saying that it's going to run out.
Okay.
Okay, well, thank you so much. I'm just going to press stop.